indulging my inner world builder's disease when I mean world building as a vehicle for character or for plot. Even if you don't have a whole invented language, there needs to be a stylistic and linguistic consistency. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. My name is Christy. I am a fantasy author. My debut novel, Theodora's Teashop, is coming out on July 28th, 2026. Pre-orders are available now. We've tried so many writer routines on the channel. We've done Octavia E. Butler, Stephen King, Donna Tartt, Hayao Miyazaki, just to name a few. And this week we're going to be doing a writing experiment inspired by none other than J.R.R Tolkien, the father of modern fantasy. I did my darndest to research the writing routine of J.R.R Tolkien, but there's not very much we can find concretely on specifics around his writing process. I can't tell you what kind of pen he used. I cannot tell you what specific time of the day he sat down to write. So for J.R.R Tolkien, what we have instead are his works. We have his letters, we have his lectures on fantasy, and of course we have his beautifully crafted, expansive world. So this video, this writing experiment is going to focus on world building. It's going to focus on writing slowly. So context for me, I've got one novel which is coming out in July this year. I've got a second novel which is almost done and off to my literary agent. I want to start working on the third novel this year, but I'm in this beautiful exploratory phase where I just get to do the world building and I get to do the like early research stuff. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. Me working on project number 3, which doesn't have a name. So who was J.R.R Tolkien and why was he so significant? John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was a British writer, scholar and philologist born in 1892. From 1925 to 1959, he was a professor of Anglo-Saxon as well as a professor of English language and literature at Oxford University. He served in World War I and he was famously friends with C.S. Lewis and a couple of other writers in a group called the Inklings.
I first began seriously to invent languages about when I was 13 or 14. I've never stopped, really. I don't desire to go and have afternoons talking Elvish to chaps. One thing, of course, Elvish is too complicated. I've never finished making it.
So this is a fun fact. He was also one of Diana Wynne Jones's lecturers. So Diana Wynne Jones, who wrote House Moving Castle and the Charmed Life books, Tolkien was one of her lecturers, and he would mumble into the blackboard because he obviously didn't want his students there listening to his lectures. What he really wanted to do was go back to his office and go and work on Lord of the Rings. Although there are a number of fantasy novels that predate Tolkien, like Blood and the Mist by Hope Mirrlees or The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, and also in Shakespeare we see fantasy elements like the fairies in Midsummer Night's Dream. All of these tales drew very heavily from a fairy tale tradition, whereas with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Tolkien did something very, very different. So in lieu of the kind of concrete specifics like number of pages written or the time of day he sat down and wrote at his desk, we can instead look at Tolkien's influences, his aims, and his outcomes. Firstly, and very importantly, Tolkien did not rush his writing. He took a very long time in between having The Hobbit published and having the first chunk of The Lord of the Rings published. I think it was like 17 years or something like that. It was a decent amount of time. This was not a man who was trying to pop out 3 novels a year. Secondly, and also very importantly, he had a job while he was doing all of this. So that was another reason he did not need to rush. His financial needs were met, his family was supported, and he had a full-time job as a scholar at Oxford University. So he probably did a lot of his writing either at Oxford, in between his other work, or at nighttime after he came home. Thirdly, Tolkien with The Lord of the Rings was attempting to create a new mythos for England. And so I can actually add to this because I recently did an Oxford class on folklore and folkloristics. So essentially, places like Greece or Rome had these really long histories of documenting their popular stories and documenting their mythology, but England did not have this. Tolkien wasn't happy with just the Arthurian legends and Sir Gawain and Gawain and the Green realized I never really said that out loud before. So Gawain and the Green Knight, for example, did not suffice for Tolkien. Folklore in England, the antiquarians had to record oral tales from different counties around the country. They had to analyze physical objects. There was not this history of the written record of folk stories and popular stories in England that there was in Rome and Greece. And so Tolkien wanted to create a mythos, to invent a mythos for England in lieu of a missing mythology that he wanted England to have. And finally, Tolkien was also a philologist. Jakob Grimm did a massive amount of work for philology and discovering the linkages between all of the Indo-European languages. But Tolkien was super duper interested in language creation.
Languages have a flavor to me, which I never understand people saying, for instance, it was awfully dry and dull, because a new language to me is just like taking a new wine or a new sweetmeat or something. My writing is very inferior to the elf. Their standard greeting when meeting A star shines upon our meeting. It's rather beautiful language, I think.
And so for him, a lot of the storytelling he did with Middle-earth was a vehicle for him to explore languages. So from all of this wonderful information, how do I devise a writing routine or writing experiment? So number one, I'm going to be writing for about an hour or two per day, every day this week, in pen, very, very slowly with no timeline. I have no intention to write any prose this week. It's just going to be world building. I'm going to love indulging my inner world builder's disease this week for my new secret project number 3. It's not secret because I'm telling you about it. For project number 3, I'm not going to count the number of pages I write this week because volume is not the goal. Quality of world building is going to be the goal. I'm also going to try and do this at 11 a.m. on the days where I can because I'm going to do like an 11s thing because I'm coming up with ideas for a brand new story. It's so important that I approach this with a calm and gentle headspace, which brings us to the sponsor of this video, Headspace. I've been using Headspace for so many years. I found that entering a writing session with a clear and happy brain is so vital for coming up with good ideas and getting down good sentences. It's the best thing that I can do for my creativity, and the Headspace app makes this so incredibly easy. I've been really enjoying this organizing thoughts meditation right before I sit down to do my writing.
Today I wanted to share a journaling practice with you that a teacher had given to me in my first year of university. Before we begin writing anything down, just take a moment to get comfortable.
Just 5 minutes of Headspace a day reduces stress. And the beautiful thing about this app is that there's so many resources on there. There's sleepcasts, there's podcasts, there are meditations for stress or for managing specific things. You can listen while you're walking. You can listen to these beautiful stories that lull you to sleep. As I said, my favorite thing to do is to listen to Headspace right before I start work because it gives my brain the space to calm down and to have my thoughts organized and nice and not messy because they're normally very, very messy. Headspace can help improve your sleep quality or anxiety. As I mentioned, I often struggle with focus, and 3 days of Headspace is proven to increase focus. The Headspace app is one that I've come back to countless times over the past decade. A 5-minute meditation is all I need to feel calm and focused and ready to make stuff. You don't need to meditate perfectly, you don't need a perfect plan or routine, just having 5 minutes here or there when you need it, or even putting Headspace into your writing routine before you start work can be incredibly helpful. You can try Headspace entirely for free for 60 days using my link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. It's 2 full months of free access compared to the 2-week trial that you normally get on their website. Please feel free to go ahead and check out Headspace. I'm gonna go get set up with my writing stuff. I'm gonna put on my focus meditation and then I can kick off this experiment for this week. For this story, I really only have the bare basics of an idea. I'm a very visual writer, so when I come up with an idea for a story, I picture little snippets of a character or little snippets of a scene, a grand house, a pirate ship, a forest, that kind of thing. So with this first introduction to world building, I'm not even kicking off with time periods or technologies or governments or religions or any of that really fun nitty-gritty cultural world building stuff. I'm starting off with images and with little snippets of character. I'm such a character writer that I can't even do world building unless it in some way relates to the character, because I want the character to be a vehicle to understand parts of the world, and I also want parts of the world to inform the character and to inform the plot. And so for me, and I suppose for most writers really, these 3 things are inextricably linked. And so even when I'm doing exploratory bits and pieces for world building, I'm finding tiny bits of character unearthing itself as I write. I did mention doing a bit of an 11s thing and making some morning tea. So I have a cake mix. I'm gonna make some chocolate and strawberry cupcakes. So my best friend and I actually went strawberry picking yesterday, and we went to the Birrenberg farm and we got so many beautiful strawberries. They're huge, freshly picked strawberries. And so I'm gonna make chocolate cupcakes and then put strawberries, I think, just on top. And then I'll have the loveliest little like morning tea 11s thing to have while I'm doing my writing this week. So I'm only gonna be writing in little snippets. I'm just gonna turn on the oven. So it's a really busy time for me at the moment because I'm juggling the editing stuff, prepping for the editing on the next round of Theodora's Tea Shop, and I'm trying to get through my second novel, juggling all my work stuff as well. So there's just a lot of creative context switching at the moment. Partially that's why I'm using a cake mix today. So I just have a few little snippets here and there where I'm doing some world building. And the whole thing that I want to do with this is that I just want to start getting the creative cogs whirring. I feel like as soon as I start just brain dumping, I just start exploring the things that I find interesting, that's when I can start to really develop ideas. I am months away from doing any kind of drafting or prose work on this story, but today I'm just having fun writing down some ideas, and I need to finish up these cupcakes. We can go back to writing, we can have some morning tea, and I can check in with you guys tomorrow. So with my previous two novels, Theodora's Tea Shop is set in a very atmospheric 1920s inspired world. There's demons and spirits, and I had a lot of fun grounding that world in a kind of late 1920s technology context, but having magic interplay with the politics and the power dynamics of this particular world. And one of the most interesting experiences about writing Theodora's Tea Shop is that when I was doing the edits with my literary agent, she ended up encouraging me to flesh out some of the political aspects of the world building. And this was something that I really badly wanted to explore, but I didn't want to have world builder's disease, and so I very much held back. And it was so lovely and heartening when I got the encouragement to do what I actually wanted and flesh out the bits and pieces a bit more. The world building in my next novel, Project Spiegel Tent, is so different because it's a much more absurd and weird and silly world, which doesn't really have to make as much sense as Theodora's Tea Shop. So in Project Spiegel Tent, we have a young woman working at a weird arts festival where there are things going on that she can't really explain, and a kind of mystery kicks up and she has to figure out what's going on, and there are speculative elements. And just like Tea Shop, there's this very bold and vibrant world in that novel, but I've had to try and work out how to juggle the speculative elements and also the real world elements. And so the world building in that one is just a lot more zany and weird, and it's not really as grounded in logic. Whereas with this next novel, I want to write something that's probably a bit more aligned with Tea Shop than it is with Spiegel Tent. I want to write something which is probably going to be grounded in a time which is older than our own, probably older than Theodora's Tea Shop, so maybe 1800s, I'm thinking. I have this concept for a novel, which is actually, I think, a concept for a trilogy, which I'm kind of intimidated by, but also excited by, and so that's what I'm doing the world building for at the moment. But I have a different novel, which is a lot smaller, which I'd also like to start working on, which I think is much more of a timely novel. I'm basically gonna try and take this opportunity to chase the thing that I'm the most excited by, because for the past 6 years, I have been trying to work on ideas that I came up with in 2020, so such a long time ago now. So yeah, with this experiment, okay, number one, hello. When I said 11s, I didn't mean 11 p.m, but here we are. It is dead set 11:01 p.m, and this is the first moment I've had for writing today. It happens that way sometimes when you're just busy and have I say writing, I'm working on other writing stuff, but it's the first moment I've had for this fun project which isn't attached to anything, which doesn't have a contract or a due date or a publication date. Yeah, it's 11 p.m. I'm working very slowly, but I've very much given myself permission this week to work slowly. I have an idea for a slightly more epic story, which is based over a much longer period of time. And so that's project number 3 currently. And I'd like for it to be a trilogy. And if not a trilogy, then even a bigger story. Like, I feel like I'm my happiest when I have big amounts of words to work with. I love a big chunky fantasy novel at my heart. I love the idea of sitting down and plotting a trilogy. I haven't done that for many, 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 many years. My first book, which failed, I had plotted like a 7-book series. I did that thing. I plotted so much and I was so happy with that. And that series, as it stands, will never see the light of day, and that is for the best. But anyway, I think I'm starting to get down some very, very basic foundational stuff, which I'm super excited about. So for a book like Theodora's Teashop, I had inspirations that came from all over the place. So one of the inspiration points was the Byzantine Empire. I started reading books about it. My experiences of living in Japan, for example, informed some of the world building in terms of the climate. For example, I really love the weather in Tokyo. I think it's so interesting that in the winter time it tends to snow once or twice in Tokyo most years. In the spring there's beautiful blossoms. In the summer it's so incredibly humid, there's hydrangeas, and the rain is so thick and heavy, and you can hear the cicadas, and it's just this beautiful, interesting, diverse weather, which is so different to where I grew up, which is far less rainy, a lot more dry, a lot more arid. And so I decided that the city of Aoyasta was going to have a subtropical climate, but I wanted where Dot was from to have a bit more of a colder climate. She's from this very morose seaside town which snows half of the year. This is a fantasy novel set in the southern hemisphere because I'm from the southern hemisphere of the earth, and I can't think of another fantasy novel that I've read that's set in the southern hemisphere. So I decided to do that with this one. So I had to think about, like, okay, if I want Aoyasta to have this kind of subtropical climate, a little bit inspired by the weather that we experienced in Tokyo, then how many kilometers south does Dot need to be in order for her to live in a town that snows about half of the year? And so I had to think about, logically, how does that happen? I had to think about mountains and the size of the land, and how on big continents the western side of the continent tends to be desert. So if we look at Western Australia, if we look at West Africa, because of the way the earth turns, you have deserts on the western side. And again, because Dot's hometown was really cold, but the city of Aoyasta is not, I had to think about, well, how long does it take for the train to get to Dot's hometown? Because the number of hours it takes is going to depend on, like, the mountains and the tunnels and the location. For me, in a story, it's the kind of thing that's excavated over a very long time with very gentle brushes, as opposed to very quickly with very big shovels. I did away with the idea of forcing myself to do this world building for a whole hour every day pretty quickly. I realized that I just didn't have enough to go off of yet in order to really justify spending that much time. Again, kind of inspired by Tolkien, but also just based on my many years of world building so far. I just want to give these ideas proper time to percolate. By Wednesday, I had a kind of rough time period that I wanted the story to be set in, give or take about 50 years either side. I also had an idea of having something that, I don't know if it's going to be like a religion, but basically I have my main character, I have another character, I want something to be diametrically opposed between them, and I think it needs to be a kind of ideology. So I don't know if the non-main character is going to be indoctrinated into something else, or if they're just going to believe something different to the main character. But this is kind of what I say when I mean world building as a vehicle for character or for plot, because plot is conflict. If I want to put a religion into the book, or if I want to put some kind of, in-world secondary reality ideology thing, I need to know before I get started, how does that impact character and how does that impact conflict? And so for me, if I want to explore this thing, then that it needs to create some kind of shift in dynamic between two people. Like, there needs to be a reason to explore that thing, right? Because when you write a story, even a big story, even a story that's like 120,000 words or 150,000 words, once you've done that enough times, you realize that's not very many words to work with. So you need everything to feed into everything else. And so this, I think, is probably a skill that I've developed as I've written stories and as I've spent more and more time doing this. It's like, if I want to spend the words on this particular part of the world, this facet, this post office, this particular article in the Constitution, it needs to in some way impact the characters. And so early on in this story, for project number 3, which does not have a name, I'm really just working with images. So after I've done all this very early exploratory work, the next step for me is to start borrowing books from the library. It's to start watching documentaries. It's for me to start doing that early research stuff. And so I'm not there yet right now. I'm just enjoying excavating these kinds of images of this world and these people and working very, very slowly to get these very first little bits down. But as I work throughout this week, the image of the story is actually becoming clearer. So in relating all of this back to Tolkien, I want to mention that I did spend a little bit of time coming up with a few different cultures which might one day show themselves in this story. I did some exploratory work on some of the worlds that could appear and also their languages. Now, I can't really share anything that I came up with this week because it's obviously so early on and it's just in this very infantile stage of not really being a thing yet, but I can share some of the world building process of Theodora's tea shop. Now, language was something that I specifically had to think about because in tea shop, the heritage of the main characters are all different. One of the main characters is named Dot, and her grandfather, for example, emigrated to the country of Kalaeum, which is where this book is set, when he was in his early 20s, so he still has the accent of his homeland, and this is quite a nostalgic thing for Dot that she associates with her grandfather. She also likes the breakfast tea from her granddad's homeland because that's what she grew up drinking. But Theodora's family, however, is from somewhere else, and Leo's family is from somewhere else again. And we see sometimes some of the language or place names come in from these different, invented, imagined countries. And the names have to have linguistic similarities because there needs to be a logic here. Specifically, the capital city of Aliaster is especially a melting pot. And so this was one of the things that I loved developing when I was in the earlier stages of writing Theodora's tea shop. Now, a good concrete example of how this interplays with character is that there is a cathedral in this story which Dot loves. She loves maps, she's really into city planning, she loves anything logical, she's very mathematical, she's historical, she's this very logical character, and she's hyper focused on this building because it's a symbol of something for her. And so when I talk about character as a vehicle of world building, we get to learn about the history of this cathedral and the way that that interplays with the melting pot elements of this city, specifically because the cathedral means a lot to Dot. We learn a lot about how she's soothed herself in her teenage years because she used to read about the cathedral because it was comforting for her. It's the Cathedral of St. Penelope who was the witch who founded their city, and that's a really important thing to Dot. And so we get to learn about this cool part of the Aliastran history because it's really specific to Dot's characterization. And so it's this kind of two birds with one stone thing where we get to hear about this cool thing, but we also get to use it to learn about the character, and it also circles back for plot as well, which I won't reveal, but it is important to the story. And so even though I obviously did not invent any languages for Theodora's tea shop, there is a logic with runes which in a way feeds into the magic system, so you could say that's kind of like a language, but we can get into that in a different video if you guys want to hear about it. But yeah, with place names specifically, even if you don't have a whole invented language, there needs to be a stylistic and linguistic consistency so that the world holds up, so that you have that kind of verisimilitude where these things seem real and concrete and thoughtful. Some places will have more Anglo-sounding names, some places will have less Anglo-sounding names. There needs to be a logic so that all of it makes sense. And so with this new story, we're very, very much not there yet. Again, I did not invent any languages this week, and I have no intention to create a new mythos with this particular work. Something that I did do though when I was researching this video, because I was having trouble finding concrete things on Tolkien that wasn't just like someone's Substack or Medium post where they just used ChatGPT to write a bunch of stuff. I ended up going back and using some of my research from years ago when I was doing a postgrad, and I started doing some of the early interim work on Tolkien and Tolkien's influences, and I stumbled across this article that I remember really enjoying at the time, which was about Tolkien's attempt to create a new mythos for England, and how Tolkien really is one of the great modernist writers. And even though we don't associate him with James Joyce or Virginia Woolf, he was writing during this time period, and one of the reasons why Tolkien probably isn't considered a great modernist writer is because he was drawing from an Anglo-Saxon and Norse mythological tradition rather than the more typical Greco-Roman tradition that Joyce, for example, was drawing from. Essentially, people didn't really know what to do with Tolkien at the time, which makes it even more remarkable when we look back now at the influence that Tolkien has had on fantasy and just the explosion of the fantasy genre ever since the publication of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. It's amazing to think how there's this entire legacy that I, as a writer, get to feed into because I have a fantasy novel coming out in July, in part because of the influence of this one man in the 1930s and then 1950s to just sit down and start inventing these secondary realities and secondary worlds. I did also want to mention that I reread On Fairy Stories while I was doing the research for this video, and I'm trying to make up for the fact that there's fewer concrete things I can include in here, because again, normally with these kinds of experiments or writing routines, I try to put in themed foods or you know, the specific time of day that person went walking, or however many kilometers, or whatever kind of bulletproof smoothie. I did reread On Fairy Stories for this, and there's a section of On Fairy Stories where Tolkien speaks about fantasy. Fantasy is a natural human activity. It certainly does not destroy or even insult reason, and it does not either blunt the appetite for nor obscure the perception of scientific verity. On the contrary, the cleaner and clearer is the reason, the better the fantasy will it make. If men were ever in a state in which they did not want to know or could not perceive truth, facts, or evidence, then fantasy would languish until they were cured. For creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun, on a recognition of fact, but not a slavery to it. So upon logic was founded the nonsense that displays itself in the tales and rhymes of Lewis Carroll. If men really could not distinguish between frogs and men, fairy stories about frog kings would not have arisen. And so that was my gently Tolkien-inspired week of world building and exploration. I did not write heaps and heaps this week. I decided to work really, really slowly. Look, if I really wanted to do this video justice, I probably should have taken 20 odd years to make it. But unfortunately, I am not working with the luxury of those kinds of timelines. I am simply here to make some fun, deeply unserious YouTube content. I am in the early stages of writing this new story, and I just think I don't really feel like pushing myself to do the world building too quickly. We might get to like July this year when Theodora's Tea Shop comes out, where I might feel a bit of a push to start really drafting this next book. But for now, I'm just going to take my time. I'm going to keep loosely plodding along. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please remember to check out Headspace if you click the link in the description down below, or use the QR code. You can try Headspace entirely for free for 60 days, so feel free to check them out. And finally, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting my videos, because without Patreon, I would not be able to make this content. I post writing updates over on Patreon. We have a book club. We're going to be reading Wuthering Heights this month. We have a Discord server. We have so many bonus things over on Patreon. So if you want to check it out, there's a link in the description down below. Pre-orders are available for Theodora's Tea Shop. If you don't want to pre-order it, you can add it on Goodreads and Storygraph. I think that's everything. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.